Having just been discharged from the hospital, I felt a familiar frustration. "I can't walk yet," I texted my son David as the nurse pushed my wheelchair toward the exit. "Can you pick me up when you have time?" His reply was a swift punch to the gut. My wife's name appeared with a message. "We can't keep dropping everything for you. Just call an Uber." That simple dismissal, I knew, would set in motion a chain of events that would change their lives for the worse once they discovered who came for me instead. I should go back a bit and explain how a single phone call transformed into the most fulfilling retribution I could have ever imagined. My name is Eleanor Parker, though most people call me Ellie. At the age of 65, I believed I had already experienced every kind of familial letdown. As it turned out, I was mistaken. Just 3 days earlier, I had been rushed to Phoenix General Hospital. The pain was excruciating, like someone was using a blowtorch on my insides, which the doctors later identified as a gallbladder issue. "Emergency surgery," they'd said. "Nothing too serious, but recovery will take a few weeks." During my entire stay, I lay in that hospital bed, enduring terrible daytime television and eating food that had the consistency of cardboard. I kept waiting for David to visit, maybe even bring the grandchildren. My daughter-in-law, Michelle, had seemed so concerned when I had first called her about the pain. "Oh my goodness, Ellie, you need to get to the hospital right away," she had said, her voice dripping with what I had genuinely believed was sincere worry. "David and I will meet you there." But they never arrived. Not for 3 days. I had tried to rationalize it, telling myself they were simply busy. David's insurance business was demanding, and Michelle had her hands full with the kids. I'd been making these kinds of excuses for myself for the past 2 years, ever since they'd purchased a house that was far too large for their budget. As I sat in that hospital wheelchair staring at David's message, something within me finally broke. Not in a shattered way, but in a way that brought clarity, like putting on a new pair of reading glasses and finally seeing the fine print that had always been there but was never in focus. Instead of an Uber, I called a cab, which felt like a more dependable choice for a post-surgery trip. About 20 minutes later, a well-dressed man in his early 60s, who was clearly not my cab driver, approached my wheelchair. "Mrs. Eleanor Parker?" His voice was both warm and professional. "My name is Leo Sterling. I'm from Regional Southwest Financial and we need to talk." I should have been alarmed, but I found myself feeling strangely calm. Perhaps it was the pain medication, or maybe I was just too emotionally drained to care anymore. "If this is about David's mortgage, Mr. Sterling," I said, "I'm afraid I'm not in a position to help right now." His expression shifted to one of genuine surprise. "Actually, Mrs. Parker, I think you'll find it's quite the opposite." "I don't understand," I said as Leo Sterling helped me into his car, a modest Toyota that suggested he was a bank employee rather than someone with flashy wealth. "Are you here in some official capacity?" "I'm a regional manager at the bank that holds your son's mortgage," Leo explained, starting the engine. "And over the past several months, David has been telling us some very interesting stories about his family situation." My blood ran cold. What kind of stories? Stories about supporting his elderly mother through extensive medical expenses, claims that you've been a significant financial burden due to progressive health issues. He glanced at me as we stopped at a red light. "According to David, you've been unable to care for yourself and have been draining his resources." I stared at him in disbelief. "That's completely untrue." "I know," Leo's voice was gentle but firm, "because I've been investigating his hardship application for loan modification. Your son has provided documentation claiming that monthly payments to you for medical care and assisted living considerations are why he's fallen behind on his mortgage." "Payments to me?" My voice came out as a high-pitched squeak. "Except the bank statements he provided show payments from you to him, consistently for over 2 years. Leo pulled into a small park and turned off the engine. "Mrs. Parker, your son has been using your generosity as evidence of his hardship while actually defaulting on a loan you don't even know you're responsible for." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Responsible for? You co-signed David's mortgage application 2 years ago. He told you it was just a character reference, didn't he?" Leo's expression was full of sympathy. "But you actually signed as a co-borrower. If he defaults, you're equally liable for the debt." I closed my eyes, remembering that day at the bank. David had been so excited, so grateful for my help. He had rushed me through the paperwork, explaining that the bank just needed someone to vouch for him. I had been proud to help my son become a homeowner. "How much?" I whispered. The current balance is $344,000 with late fees and penalties. I opened my eyes to find Leo studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Mr. Sterling, why are you telling me this personally? Isn't this something that should be handled through official channels? Something flickered across his face, an emotion I couldn't identify. Because fraud cases involving elder abuse deserve personal attention. And because, he paused, seeming to struggle with his words, something about your name seemed familiar and I wanted to meet you myself. Familiar how? Leo was silent for a long moment, staring out at families playing in the park. Mrs. Parker, what was your maiden name? Sullivan, I answered automatically. Eleanor Sullivan. Why? The change in his expression was immediate and profound. Color drained from his face and his hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Lee, I whispered, the impossible recognition hitting me like a lightning strike. Hello, Ellie. Leo's voice was barely audible. I've been searching for you for over 4 decades. The summer of 1980 crashed over me like a tidal wave. Lee Sterling, half Irish, half Italian, with dreams of changing the world and promises that stretched beyond the horizons of our small Ohio town. The boy I was supposed to meet at Union Station. The man I had planned to marry. You changed your name, I managed. Sterling was my stepfather's name. I started using it after. He swallowed hard. After you didn't show up that morning. Tears were streaming down my face now. I did show up. I waited for 3 days. My parents told me you'd gotten the job in San Francisco and decided you didn't want a small-town girl holding you back. Leo turned toward me completely, his eyes shimmering with tears that had not yet fallen. He told me that my father had visited him in Cleveland 6 months later and informed him that I had married someone else and was expecting another man's baby. My father had supposedly said that I wanted Leo to stay away from me. The words tumbled out broken. They both lied to us. Leo spoke softly, saying, 45 years. He went on, for 45 years I've wondered what I did wrong, what I could have said differently. I reached over the console and took his hand. It was the same gentle hand that used to hold mine during those long walks we took by the lake. I told him that I had married Gideon because I thought he had abandoned me, because my parents had convinced me he had never truly loved me. I never stopped loving you, he whispered back. He explained that even after he married someone else, after his own divorce, after all those years, he had never stopped thinking about the girl whose laugh sounded like wind chimes, the girl who was supposed to change his life. We stayed in the car for 20 minutes, crying, talking, and trying to comprehend 4 decades of lost time. Finally, Leo composed himself enough to return to the matter at hand. Ellie, he said, I need you to understand something. When I saw the name Eleanor Parker in David's file and noticed your former address was listed as Ohio, I started to wonder. When the background check showed your maiden name was Sullivan, I knew I had to meet you. His voice grew firmer. But regardless of our past, what your son has done is a serious case of fraud. He's not just deceiving the bank, he's arranged for you to take responsibility for his debts. I asked him, what exactly has he done? He's 3 months behind on his mortgage payments, Leo explained. He's submitted an application for loan modification, claiming he's experiencing financial difficulty because he is taking care of his incompetent mother. He continued in a more professional tone. He has provided falsified medical records stating that you have dementia and require full-time care. He added that my son had also used my actual bank statements as evidence of his expenses, mislabeling the money I had given him as care payments from me. The scope of the betrayal was stunning. So when I paid his mortgage, it was transformed into expensive home modifications for your disability, I said, trying to make sense of it. When I bought groceries for them, it became specialized dietary requirements for your health conditions. Leo gave my hand a squeeze. He's turned your love into proof of your incompetence. What happens next? I asked. Leo's smile was grim. Now we give him exactly what he's been requesting. A visit from his incompetent mother. The next morning I was in Leo's bank office, looking through a conference room window at my son. He was spreading documents across the table. David looked self-assured, almost arrogant, as he gestured enthusiastically to the loan officer who was taking notes. 26 minutes of complete fiction so far, Leo murmured next to me. He's currently detailing how your progressive dementia requires round-the-clock supervision. I almost laughed. Just yesterday, after our emotional reunion, Leo and I had spent hours walking through the downtown area, talking about our lost years and catching up on our separate lives. This morning, I had done my usual yoga routine and prepared breakfast for both of us. Some dementia. "Are you ready for this, Ellie?" he asked. I straightened my shoulders and smoothed my dress. "I have been ready for this conversation for 2 years," I replied. "I just didn't realize it." Leo opened the conference room door. "David, I would like you to meet someone." The expression on my son's face was worth every moment of yesterday's shock and tears. His mouth literally fell open and the papers in his hands scattered onto the floor. "Mom, what are you doing here? How did you?" He trailed off. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, settling into the chair across from him with deliberate calm. "Please don't let me interrupt. I was just hearing about my progressive dementia. Do continue." David's face shifted through confusion, panic, and desperate calculation. "I can explain," he said. "Oh, good," Leo said, closing the door behind him. "Because I am very interested in explanations, especially about these medical bills." He placed a folder on the table and opened it to show copies of checks. "My checks. Would you like to explain to your mother how her mortgage payments turned into her medical expenses?" Leo asked. David recovered quickly and I had to give him credit for that. He smoothly transitioned into the concerned son act. "Mom, you don't understand the situation," he said, reaching across the table for my hand. I pulled it back. "I've been trying to shield you from the stress of our financial troubles," he went on. "Yes, I did use some of your support money as documentation, but only because the bank required proof of our hardship." "Hardship caused by caring for me?" I asked, a hint of sweetness in my tone. "It's not like that, David." Leo's voice cut through my son's stuttering. "You submitted a loan modification application asserting that your mother needs full-time care due to progressive dementia and mobility issues. You provided medical records that claim she has been hospitalized 6 times this year for complications related to her condition." The blood drained from David's face. "Those are not falsified," he stammered. "Mrs. Parker," Leo continued, "would you like to tell your son what you did yesterday afternoon?" I smiled at David's increasingly desperate look. "Well, after our conversation, I walked 3 miles through downtown Phoenix with Mr. Sterling here. Then I cooked dinner for both of us and spent the evening discussing literature and banking regulations." I paused for effect. "After that, I drove myself back to my apartment and took my usual evening walk around the neighborhood." David's mouth opened and closed without a sound. "Tell me, son," I continued. "Exactly which part of that sounds like someone who needs full-time care for dementia?" "This is all a misunderstanding," David said, but his voice lacked conviction now. "Mom, you know I would never intentionally. Michelle and I have been so worried about you." "Really?" I leaned back in my chair. "Because when I texted you asking for a ride home from surgery, your immediate response was to tell me to call an Uber. That doesn't sound like someone who's worried about their mother's well-being." Leo opened yet another folder. "David, this is your original loan application from 2 years ago," he stated. "It shows your annual income was $78,000. Your debt-to-income ratio was already at the highest we normally permit." Leo looked up, his expression serious. "You only qualified for this loan because your mother co-signed." My head whipped around to face David. "You told me I was just a character reference," I said to him, then to my mother. "Mom, he said you were a character reference, not a co-signer." I turned back to David. "You said the bank simply needed someone to confirm your trustworthiness." My voice was getting louder despite my efforts to remain calm. "Are you telling me I have been legally responsible for this debt the entire time?" Leo nodded with a grim look on his face. "Mrs. Parker, you are equally responsible for this mortgage," he said. "If David defaults, the bank can pursue you for the full amount." The room seemed to spin slightly. "And what happens if I'm unable to pay?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Foreclosure proceedings will be initiated against both of you," he replied. "There could also be a garnishment of assets, including your retirement accounts and your current home." I looked at my son, a stranger wearing his face, who had put my financial security at risk without my knowledge or permission. "You made me responsible for a debt that could ruin my retirement," I told him, "and then you lied to the bank about why you can't pay it." David's response was weak. "It was only supposed to be temporary," he said. "Just until the business improved." 2 years, David, I said, a tremor in my voice. 2 years of lies while I was sending you money, believing I was helping my own family. I stood up, needing to create some distance between us. And now you want the bank to believe I am mentally unfit so you can change the terms of a loan you tricked me into co-signing. Leo cleared his throat. There is more, Mrs. Parker, he said. The falsified medical records David submitted constitute bank fraud. Since this involves a federally insured institution, we are looking at federal charges. David's face went pale. Leo counted on his fingers. Federal charges, bank fraud, falsification of documents, and elder financial abuse. The penalties are quite severe, especially when they involve the exploitation of senior citizens. I watched my son come to terms with the gravity of his situation. The cocky confidence had completely disappeared, replaced by raw terror. Part of me wanted to comfort him, to solve this problem as I had so many of his childhood issues. But the larger part of me, the part that had been used and deceived for years, felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Power. Mr. Sterling, I said slowly, what are my options here? Leo replied, well, that depends on how cooperative everyone wants to be. David looked back and forth between us with increasing desperation. What does that mean? He asked. I met my son's eyes and smiled. For the first time in many years I held all the cards. It means, my dear, I said, that your life is about to change dramatically. And this time I am the one who will be making the decisions. The phone began ringing at 6 in the morning the next day. Michelle's name appeared on my screen, but I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again at 6:15 and 6:30. By the fourth call I finally picked up. Ellie. Thank God, Michelle's voice said, breathless with panic. We need to talk. There has been a terrible misunderstanding. Has there? I sat up in bed, surprisingly well rested for someone whose world had been turned upside down just 2 days earlier. David told me what happened at the bank. That man, Mr. Sterling, he is obviously mistaken about the paperwork. We can fix this. I almost laughed. Even now, Michelle was attempting to control the narrative. Michelle dear, I was there, I said. I heard every word David said. There is no confusion. But you don't understand the pressure we have been under. Her voice cracked with what sounded like practiced emotion. David's business has been struggling. My maternity leave used up our savings, and he was just trying to buy us some time by committing fraud and making me an unwitting accomplice. A long silence stretched between us before Michelle tried a different strategy. Look, we know you're upset, she said, but think about Lily and Noah. Do you really want their father to face criminal charges? They need stability, Ellie. They need their family to stay together. There was the manipulation I had been blind to for years, using the grandchildren as leverage to appeal to my grandmotherly heart. Might have worked 1 week ago. Michelle, I said calmly. Where are the children right now? They are at my mother's house, she responded. Just until we sort this out. Smart move, I said. Getting them away before the lawyers show up. I heard her sharp intake of breath. Because that is what is happening today, is it not? David is scrambling to find legal representation. How did you know, Ellie? We are family. We stick together through difficult times. It is a funny thing about family, I said, walking to my kitchen to start the coffee. I thought that meant honesty, respect, and not using your mother as collateral for criminal activity. I paused. Tell David I will be at the house at 2 o'clock this afternoon. We need to discuss my options. Your options, she said. Mr. Sterling was very enlightening about what cooperation might look like. Apparently, the bank is willing to consider alternatives to prosecution under certain circumstances. I hung up and immediately called Leo. Good morning, Ellie. His voice was warm with an affection that made my heart skip a beat. I trust you slept well. Better than I have in months, I replied. Michelle just called with the predictable damage control script. They want to meet this afternoon. I settled into my favorite chair. Perfect, he said. Are you ready for phase 2? What exactly is phase 2? I asked. We teach your son what consequences actually look like, he said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. At exactly 2 o'clock I rang the doorbell of the house that I had unwittingly helped them buy. Michelle opened the door, her eyes red from crying, clutching a tissue in her hand. Ellie, I'm so glad you came, she said, ushering me inside. David was there, hunched over his laptop, likely searching for a criminal defense lawyer. We've been up all night trying to figure out how to fix this, Michelle explained. This mess that you both created, I clarified, making myself comfortable in an armchair that had once been mine. I know I messed up, David admitted, looking up from his screen with a weary expression. I know you're mad, but we need to team up here. That banker is trying to tear our family apart. Leo Sterling is just trying to collect on a legitimate debt that you failed to pay while committing fraud, I corrected him. I took a folder out of my purse, a folder that Leo had given me. Speaking of which, I have a few questions about my financial responsibility in this matter. Michelle and David exchanged worried looks. What kind of questions? Michelle asked cautiously. Well, since I am listed as a co-borrower on your mortgage without my knowledge, that makes me liable for the debt, but it also gives me certain legal rights, I explained. I opened the folder and pretended to be examining the documents. These rights include the ability to take possession of the collateral property to protect my interests. David's face went pale. What does that mean? It means, my dear, that if you cannot pay the mortgage, I can take over the payments myself, I said with a sweet smile, enjoying their horrified expressions. Since my name is already on the loan documents, I can assume ownership of the house to prevent it from going into foreclosure. You can't do that, Michelle whispered. Actually, I can, I replied. And given that I have been subsidizing your mortgage payments anyway, it wouldn't change much for me financially. I leaned back in the chair. The only difference would be that you would need to find somewhere else to live. David leaped to his feet. Mom, you can't kick us out of our house. Your house? I asked, raising an eyebrow. The house that I unknowingly co-signed for? The one I have been helping you pay for while you lied to federal banking authorities about my mental capacity. Michelle began to cry in earnest, but I had seen this act too many times to be affected by it. However, there is an alternative, I continued. Mr. Sterling told me that the bank would consider dropping the criminal charges under certain conditions. What conditions? David asked, his voice filled with desperation. I pulled out another document. Complete financial restitution. Not just the missed mortgage payments, but also penalties, legal fees, and compensation for the damages caused by the fraud. I quickly scanned the numbers that Leo had calculated. The total comes to $67,000. We do not have that kind of money, Michelle sobbed. No, but I do, I said, letting the words sink in. I could pay it. Save you from federal prison. Let you keep the house. Make this whole thing disappear. A glimmer of hope appeared in their eyes. You would do that? David asked. For a price. I pulled out the final document. A formal rental agreement. Notarized and legally binding. I laid it on the table. I pay off your debt and assume full ownership of this house. You can continue living here as my tenants. It will be market rate rent on a 1-year lease with the option to purchase back your equity at fair market value. Michelle leaned forward to read the document. These rent payments are higher than our mortgage was. Yes, I confirmed. It is the current market rate for a house of this size in this neighborhood. I folded my hands. Of course, you're welcome to find somewhere else if you believe you can find a better deal. And if we can't make the rent? David's voice was barely a whisper. Standard eviction procedures would apply, though I would be more patient than most landlords given our relationship, I said, pausing for a moment. Assuming our relationship survives this experience. You're blackmailing us, Michelle said quietly. I am offering you a way out of federal prison and foreclosure, I responded, keeping my voice pleasant. The alternative is to watch Mr. Sterling proceed with criminal charges while I exercise my rights as co-signer anyway. It would be the same outcome for you, but with the added bonus of David having a felony record. The grandfather clock in the corner, another one of my gifts, ticked away the seconds as they considered their options. There is something else, I said, opening my purse once more. I had a very interesting conversation with Mr. Sterling about the bank's investigation. David's face went pale. What investigation? When banks uncover fraud, they are required to review all related accounts, I explained. So, the team has been looking at your entire financial history with Regional Southwest. I pulled out a printed report. It turns out this is not the first time you have been creative with your paperwork. Michelle grabbed David's arm. What is she talking about? Your business line of credit application from 18 months ago, I said, watching David's expression become one of shock. The one where you claimed I was a business partner contributing startup capital. Except I never contributed any startup capital. You used my bank statements showing the mortgage assistance as proof of business investment. Oh God, Michelle whispered. Two separate incidents of fraud involving the same victim, I said, refolding the report. The prosecutor says that establishes a pattern of criminal behavior, which makes a plea bargain much more difficult. Unless, of course, the victim testifies that she was a willing participant who simply misunderstood the arrangements. David's hands were trembling. What do you want, Mom? I looked around the room at the life they had built with my money, furnished with my gifts and secured with my unknowing signature. I want what I have always wanted, David. I want to be treated with respect. I want honesty, and I want my family to stop seeing me as their personal bank account. And if we sign this agreement, then Mr. Sterling receives a letter from me stating that all financial arrangements were made with my full knowledge and consent. The investigation closes, the criminal charges disappear, and we start over with a clear understanding of everyone's role. Michelle was reading the rental agreement again, probably calculating exactly how trapped they were. This is insane, she said. You're our family, not our landlord. Leaving, I spoke to Michelle. You made that choice, I said, the moment you decided I was too much of a burden to pick up from the hospital. 3 days later, I was having coffee downtown with Leo at a small bistro. He was already there, scrolling through his phone, looking completely relaxed. Good morning, Ellie. He greeted me, standing to offer a quick warm kiss on my cheek. You look incredibly well for someone who supposedly needs constant care. I laughed as I slid into the chair opposite him. It's amazing what distancing yourself from dishonest family members can do for your health. He had already ordered my coffee and I took a sip. Any word from David's attorney? Leo's smile was full of satisfaction. 3 calls yesterday begging to talk about resolution options. Apparently your rental agreement was very persuasive. They signed it this morning, notarized and filed with the county clerk's office. You are officially their landlord now. He raised his coffee cup in a toast. Congratulations on your new investment property. I should have felt victorious, but a feeling of unease lingered. Leo, I began slowly, can I ask you something personal? Of course, he replied. How did you know it was me? I mean, Eleanor Parker is a fairly common name, and Sullivan isn't exactly a one-of-a-kind name either. Leo carefully set down his cup. Your address, your history, your credit report. You lived on Maple Street in Millfield, Ohio until 1982. My heart stopped. You lived on Oak Street just 3 blocks away. A gentle smile spread across his face. I drove past your house for months after you married Gideon, just hoping to catch a glimpse of you. I memorized that address 45 years ago. Tears welled in my eyes. I can't believe we found each other again, I whispered, reaching across the table to take his hand. I can't believe I almost missed you. Leo's fingers intertwined with mine. If David had been honest on his loan application, if he hadn't committed fraud, our paths would have never crossed. So, in a strange way, I suppose I should thank my son for lying to federal banking authorities. I prefer to think of it as destiny finding a way, he said, his eyes filled with the same tenderness I remembered from our youth. Though I admit the circumstances are less romantic than I might have hoped. We spent the next 60 minutes catching up on our lost years. Leo had married his college girlfriend in 1983 and divorced 15 years later when they realized they had never truly been happy. He had no children. His ex-wife hadn't wanted any, and he had convinced himself he didn't either. I think I was afraid, he confessed. Afraid that loving children would somehow betray what we'd had. It sounds ridiculous, but there it is. I told him about Gideon, a good man who had given me stability and 2 children, but never the passionate love I had shared with Lee Sterling in the summer of 1980. I spoke about raising David and his sister Chloe, and losing Gideon to cancer 5 years ago. I described the slow, painful realization that my children viewed me as a responsibility rather than a person. Chloe lives in Seattle, I explained. We talk once a month, but she has her own life. She never asks for money or favors. Our relationship is distant but respectful. David, on the other hand, was my baby. My charming, irresponsible baby who I kept enabling because I couldn't bear to let him fail. I sighed. I suppose I'm as much to blame for this situation as he is. No, Leo's voice was firm. You loved your son. He chose to exploit that love. There's a big difference. My phone vibrated with a text message. David's name appeared on the screen. Mom, can we talk? I've been thinking about everything you said and I want to make this right. Not just the rental agreement, everything. I want to be the son you deserve. I showed the message to Leo, who read it with a raised eyebrow. What do you think? I asked. I think he's had 3 days to realize that federal prison isn't a very attractive option, Leo said, his expression thoughtful. But people can change. Sometimes a crisis forces a person to grow in ways nothing else could. Should I respond? I asked. That depends, Leo replied. Are you ready to find out if your son is capable of genuine remorse, or if this is just another manipulation? I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, come to my apartment tomorrow at 7 p.m. Come alone. We'll talk. The next evening, David arrived at my door holding a manila envelope and wearing an expression I hadn't seen since he was 12 years old and had broken my favorite vase. Hi, Mom. His voice was hushed and respectful in a way it hadn't been in years. Come in, I said, gesturing toward the living room Leo had helped me redecorate over the weekend. Can I get you something to drink? Just water, please, he said, carefully taking a seat on the edge of the sofa, the envelope clutched in his hands. When I returned with his water, he looked up at me with eyes that were genuinely remorseful. I owe you an apology that is bigger than words can express, he began. What I did, lying to the bank, forging medical records, putting your financial security at risk, it was literally criminal. And the worst part is that I justified it by telling myself I was protecting you from stress. I stayed quiet and waited. But the truth is, I was protecting myself from failure. From having to admit that my business wasn't as successful as I claimed. From admitting to Michelle that I couldn't provide the life I'd promised her. His voice cracked. And I used your love as a shield against consequences I should have faced on my own. What's in the envelope, David? I asked. He handed it to me with shaking hands. Inside was a cashier's check for $67,000, the exact amount I had paid to cover his restitution. I stared at the check. Where did this money come from? I sold my business at a loss, but it was enough. He took a shaky breath. I also spoke to a counselor about my financial dishonesty. It's more widespread than she had ever imagined. People who lie about their finances to avoid disappointing their families. Michelle, as she should be, is furious with her. They are in marriage counseling, attempting to determine if their trust can be rebuilt. He met her eyes in the same way she was hoping they could rebuild trust. She looked at her son, truly seeing him, and discovered something she hadn't seen in years. Accountability, growth, and the potential for change. The rental agreement stands, she stated with conviction. You will pay the market rate rent and you will earn back the right to call this house your own. I understand, he said. However, she continued, I am willing to discuss a path back to being a family, a real family built on honesty and mutual respect. His face was flushed with relief. Thank you, Mom. I will not squander this opportunity. 6 months later, she stood in the kitchen of the house she now owned, preparing Thanksgiving dinner. The rental arrangement had gone better than anyone had anticipated. David and Michelle had evolved into respectful tenants, prompt with their payments and mindful of boundaries. More importantly, they had become honest family members. Leo was in the living room, teaching her 7-year-old granddaughter Lily how to play chess while her 9-year-old grandson Noah showed him something on his tablet. Her grandchildren had taken to him right away, drawn in by his endless patience and gentle humor. The doorbell rang and she dried her hands before answering. David stood on the porch holding a bottle of wine and wearing a genuine smile. Happy Thanksgiving, Mom, he said. And for the first time in many years he appeared genuinely happy to see her. Happy Thanksgiving, sweetheart, she said, hugging him and noticing how he held on a little longer than usual. This is for you, he said, handing her an envelope. An early Christmas present. Inside was a contract, a purchase agreement for the house at a fair market value, with a down payment representing 2 years of consistent rent payments and responsible financial behavior. David, you don't have to, she said. Yes, I do, he said, his voice firm. I want to reclaim this house the right way. I want my children to see their father as a man who keeps his word and accepts responsibility for his actions. She looked past him to where Michelle was assisting the children in getting out of the car. She saw her wave with genuine warmth. Michelle had surprised her over the past months, revealing a backbone she hadn't known existed. Once she stopped covering up for David's lies, she had become a woman she truly respected. "We will talk about it after the holidays," she said, leaking her arm through her son's. "Leo has been looking forward to meeting your family properly." As her family gathered around her table in her house by her rules, with her chosen partner at her side, she reflected on the girl who had waited at that train station 45 years ago. She couldn't have imagined this life, but she believes that the girl would have been proud of how the story was turning out. Later that evening, as they were cleaning dishes together, Leo said, "When I decided to personally investigate your son's loan application, I never imagined it would lead to this. Fate has a sense of humor." She agreed, handing him a wine glass to dry. "Though I still think you're slightly insane for driving for a rideshare service on weekends." Leo laughed. "Regional bank managers do not make as much money as people believe. And I enjoy meeting people and hearing their stories." He put the glass down and turned to face her. "That day when I saw your pickup request and recognized the name, I knew I had to be the one to drive you. You could have just called me and said what? Hi, Eleanor. This is the guy who was supposed to marry you 45 years ago. And by the way, your son is committing fraud." Leo shook his head. "I needed to see you first to know if you were happy, if you'd had a good life without me." "And what did you conclude?" she asked. "That you were lonely? That your family was taking advantage of your generosity? And that you were still the strongest, most beautiful woman I had ever known?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Which brings me to something I have been wanting to ask you." Her heart came to a complete stop. "Lee, I know we are no longer children. I know we have both lived full lives since we last saw each other, but I also know that some things are worth the wait." He opened the box, revealing a simple, elegant ring. "Eleanor Sullivan Parker. Will you marry me?" She stared at the ring through happy tears. "Are you sure? I have a complicated family, rental properties, and a granddaughter who cheats at chess. I come with no family at all, a modest savings account, and a terrible habit of working too much." Leo's smile was radiant. "I believe we perfectly balance each other out." "Then yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you," she said as he slipped the ring onto her finger. She thought about all of the paths that had brought them back to each other. David's fraud had been terrible, painful, and destructive, but it had also been the thread that wove their lives back together. "There is something else," Leo said, pulling her into his arms. "I have spoken with my supervisor about taking early retirement. If you are interested, I would like to travel with you. To see some of the places we discussed visiting when we were 20. What about David and Michelle? The grandchildren will always be a part of our lives. But Ellie, we've been waiting for our second chance for 45 years. I don't want to waste another day." She looked around her kitchen, thinking about the family gathering they had just hosted, the respect she had earned, and the love she had rediscovered. For years she had felt invisible, taken for granted, and useful only for the financial support she could provide. She was now a woman who owned property, commanded respect, and was loved for exactly who she was. A woman who had learned to value herself enough to demand that others value her as well. "When do we go?" she asked. Leo's laugh was pure joy. "How about tomorrow? I know a small place in San Francisco where two old lovers can begin their new lives together." As they stood in her kitchen holding each other and planning their future, she realized that sometimes the best revenge is not revenge at all. Sometimes it is simply refusing to be invisible anymore, demanding the respect you deserve, and being brave enough to embrace the love you thought you had lost forever. The girl who had waited at that train station back in 1980 finally got her happy ending. It was just 45 years later than planned. After all, the best stories are the ones in which the heroine saves herself and gets the boy in the end. Thank you for listening. Do not forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice is important.